Hey guys, we are on day 7 of Esperanza Rising. We have started a new chapter called Las Guayabas, which means guavas. So if you don't know what a guava is, what kind of fruit that is, look it up and see a picture of it. We don't see those a lot around Kentucky. You can buy them at the store, but they're um, people don't use them a lot around here. Okay, so if we will remember from our last reading, Mama and Esperanza were being helped by Senor Rodriguez, and they were joining Miguel's family and traveling to the United States. They were having to do it in secret because Mama had told Tio Luis that she would marry him, but she really had no intention of doing that. So she just did that to give them a chance to escape. So it all has to be in secret. Okay. They emerged from the fig orchard and continued through a pear grove. When they came into a clearing, they saw Senor Rodriguez waiting with a lantern by the barn doors. They hurried inside. Pigeons fluttered in the rafters. Their wagon was waiting, surrounded by crates of green guavas. Did Marisol come? Asked Esperanza, her eyes searching the barn. Remember, that's her best friend. I could tell no one about your departure, said Senor Rodriguez. When the time is right, I will tell her that you looked for her and said goodbye. Now, we must hurry. You need the protection of darkness. Why couldn't he tell Marisol? Why could Senor Rodriguez not tell his daughter that he was helping them escape? You think about that. Alfonso, Miguel, and Senor Rodriguez had built another floor in the wagon, higher than the real one and open in the back, with barely enough room between for Mama, Esperanza, and Hortensia to lie down. Hortensia lined it with blankets. Esperanza had known about the plan, but now she hesitated when she saw the small space. So it's sort of like a secret compartment in the wagon. There's the floor and then an extra board with fruit on top of it, guavas, and they're in between hiding. Please, can I sit with Alfonso and Miguel? Mija, it is necessary, said Mamma. There are too many bandits, said Alfonso. It is not safe for women to be on the roads at night. Besides, your uncles have many spies. Remember, that is why we must take the wagon to Zacatecas and catch the train there instead of from Aguas Calientes. Luis had bragged about the engagement to everyone, said Hortensia. Think how angry he will be when he discovers you have gone. We cannot take the chance of you being seen. So think about all of the reasons why Hortensia and Mama and Esperanza have to hide and can't sit on top with the men. There were several reasons that I gave there. So think about all the reasons why they can't. Mama and Hortensia said grateful goodbyes to Senor Rodriguez, then slid between the floors of the wagon. Esperanza reluctantly scooted on her back between them. When can we get out? Every few hours we will stop and stretch, said Mamma. Esperanza stared at the wood planks just a few inches from her face. She could hear Alfonso, Miguel, and Senor Rodriguez dumping crate after crate of guavas onto the floor above them, the almost ripe fruit rolling and tumbling as it was piled on. The guavas smelled fresh and sweet, like pears and oranges all in one. Then she felt then she felt the guavas roll in around her feet as Alfonso and Miguel covered the opening. If anyone saw the wagon on the road, it would look like a farmer and his son taking a load of fruit to market. How are you? Alfonso asked, sounding far away. We are fine, said Hortensia. The wagon pulled out of the barn and the guavas shifted, then settled. It was dark inside, and it felt like someone was rocking them in a bumpy cradle, sometimes side to side and sometimes back and forth. Esperanza began to feel frightened. She knew that with a few kicks of her feet she could get out, but she still felt trapped. Suddenly she thought she couldn't breathe. Mama, she said, gasping for air. Right here, Esperanza. Everything is fine. Do you remember, said Hortensia, taking her hand, when you were only 5 years old and we hid from the thieves? You were so brave for such a little girl. Your parents and Alfonso and the other servants had gone to town. It was just you and me and Miguel in the house. We were in your bedroom, and I was pinning the hem of your beautiful blue silk dress. Do you remember that dress? You wanted it pinned higher so your new shoes would show. Esperanza's eyes were beginning to adjust to the darkness and to the pitch and roll of the wagon. Miguel ran into the house because he had seen bandits, said Esperanza, exhaling. She remembered standing on a chair with her arms outstretched like a bird ready for flight, while Hortensia fitted the sides of her dress. And she remembered the new shoes, shiny and black. Yes, said Hortensia. I looked out the window to see 6 men, their faces covered with handkerchiefs, and they all held rifles. They were renegades who thought they had permission to steal from the rich and give it to the poor. But they didn't always give it to the poor, and sometimes they killed innocent people. We hid under the bed, said Esperanza, and we pulled down the bed covers so they couldn't see us. She remembered staring straight up at the bedboards, much like the boards enclosing them in the wagon now. She took another long breath. What we didn't know was that Miguel had a big field mouse in his pocket, said Hortensia. Yes, he was going to scare me with it, said Esperanza. The wagon creaked and swayed. They could hear Alfonso and Miguel murmuring above them. The persistent smell of the guavas filled their noses. Esperanza relaxed a little. Hortensia continued. The men came into the house and we could hear them opening cupboards and stealing the silver. Then we heard them climb the stairs. 2 men came into the bedroom and we saw their big boots through a crack in the bed cover. But we didn't say a word until a pin poked me and I moved my leg and made a noise. I was so frightened they would find us, said Hortensia. But Miguel pushed the mouse out from under the bed and it ran around the room. The men were startled but started laughing. And then one of them said, It is just a raton. We've got plenty. Let's go. And they left, said Esperanza. Mamma said, They took almost all of the silver, but Papa and I only cared that you all were safe. Do you remember how Papa said that Miguel was very smart and brave and asked him what he wanted for protecting you, his most prized possession? Esperanza remembered. Miguel wanted to go on a train ride. Hortensia started to hum softly, and Mamma held Esperanza's hand. Miguel's reward, that day long train ride to Zacatecas, seemed like yesterday. Miguel had been 8 and Esperanza 5. She wore the beautiful blue silk dress and could still see Miguel standing at the station, wearing a bow tie and practically shining, as if Hortensia had cleaned and starched his entire body. Even his hair was slicked down, smooth, and his eyes gleamed with excitement. He was mesmerized by the locomotive, watching it slowly pull in. Esperanza had been excited too. When the train arrived, all sputtering and blustery, porters had hurried to escort them, showing them the way to their car. Papa took her hand and Miguel's, and they boarded, waving goodbye to Alfonso and Hortensia. The compartment had seats of soft leather, and she and Miguel had bounced happily upon them. Later, they ate in the dining car at little tables covered in white linens and set with silver and crystal. When the waiter came and asked if there was anything he could bring them, Esperanza said, Yes, please bring lunch now. The men and women, dressed in their hats and fancy clothes, smiled and chuckled at what must have looked like a doting father and his 2 privileged children. When they arrived in Zacatecas, a woman wrapped in a colorful rebozo, a blanket shawl, boarded the train selling mangoes on a stick. The mangoes were peeled and carved to look like exotic flowers. Papa bought one for each of them. On the return ride, she and Miguel, with their noses pressed against the window and their hands still sticky from the fresh mango, had waved to every person they saw. The wagon jostled them now as it hit a hole in the road. Esperanza wished she could get to Zacatecas as fast as she had that day on the train, instead of traveling on back roads hidden in a slow wagon. But this time she was buried beneath a mountain of guavas and could not wave to anyone. There was no comfort, and there was no papa. Esperanza stood at the station in Zacatecas, tugging at the second-hand dress. It didn't fit properly and was the most awful yellow. And even though she had been out of the wagon for some hours, she still smelled like guavas. It had taken them 2 days to arrive to Zacatecas, but finally that morning they left the wagon, hidden in a thicket of shrubs and trees, and walked into town. After the discomfort of the wagon, she was looking forward to the train. The locomotive arrived, pulling a line of cars and hissing and spewing steam. But they did not board the fancy car with the compartments and leather seats, or the dining car with the white linens. Instead, Alfonso led them to a car with rows of wooden benches, like church pews facing each other, already crowded with peasants. Trash littered the floor, and it reeked of rotting fruit and urine. A man with a small goat on his lap grinned at Esperanza, revealing no teeth. Three barefoot children, two boys and a girl, crowded near their mother. Their legs were chalky with dust, their clothes were in tatters, and their hair was grimy. An old, frail beggar woman pushed by them to the back of the car, clutching a picture of Our Lady of Guadalupe. Her hand was outstretched for alms. Esperanza had never been so close to so many peasants before. When she went to school, all of her friends were like her. When she went to town, she was escorted and hurried away from any beggars. And the peasants always kept their distance. That was simply the way it was. She couldn't help but wonder if they would steal her things. Mamma, said Esperanza, stopping at the doorway, we cannot travel in this car. It it is not clean, and the people do not look trustworthy. Esperanza saw Miguel frown as he edged around her to sit down. So Esperanza's kind of being a little bit of a spoiled brat right now. She's not used to traveling in the peasant car. But once again, she's saying things that hurts Miguel's feelings because Miguel has traveled in that car his whole life. He basically is one of those peasants. Mama took her hand and guided her to an empty bench where Esperanza slid over next to the window. Papa would never have had us sit here, and Abuelita wouldn't approve, she said stubbornly. Mija, it is all we can afford, said Mamma. We must make do. It is not easy for me either, but remember, we are going to a place that will be better than living with Tio Luis, and at least we will be together. The train pulled out and settled into a steady motion. Hortensia and Mamma took out their crocheting. Mamma was using a small hook and white cotton thread to make carpetas, lace doilies to put under a lamp or vase. She held up her work to Esperanza and smiled. Would you like to learn? Esperanza shook her head. Why did Mamma bother crocheting lace? They had no vases or lamparas to put on top of them. Esperanza leaned her head against the window. She knew she did not belong here. She was Esperanza Ortego from El Rancho de las Rosas. She crossed her arms tight and stared out the window. For hours, Esperanza watched the undulating land pass in front of her. Everything seemed to remind her of what she had left behind. The nopales reminded her of Abuelita, who loved to eat the prickly pear cactus sliced and soaked in vinegar and oil. The dogs from small villages that barked and ran after the train reminded her of Marisol, whose dog, Capitan, raced after, chased after trains the same way, and every time Esperanza saw a shrine decorated with crosses, flowers, and miniature statues of saints next to the rails, she couldn't help but wonder if it had been someone's father who had died on the tracks, and if somewhere there was another girl who missed him too. Esperanza opened her valise to check on the doll, lifting it out and straightening her clothes. The barefoot peasant girl ran over. Mona, she said, and reached up to touch the doll. Esperanza quickly jerked it away and put it back in the valise, covering it with the old clothes. Mona, Mona, cried the little girl, running back to her mother. And then she began to cry. Mamma and Hortensia both stopped their needles and stared at Esperanza. Why do you think Esperanza won't let the little girl touch the doll? I'm not going to answer that, but you can think about it. Mamma looked across at the girl's mother. I am sorry for my daughter's bad manners. Esperanza looked at Mamma in surprise. Why was she apologizing to these people? She and Mamma shouldn't even be sitting in this car. Hortensia looked from one to the other and excused herself. I think I will find Alfonso and Miguel to see if they bought tortillas at the station. Mamma looked at Esperanza. I don't think it would have hurt to let her hold it for a few moments. Mamma, she is poor and dirty, said Esperanza. But Mamma interrupted. When you scorn these people, you scorn Miguel, Hortensia, and Alfonso, and you embarrass me and yourself. As difficult as it is to accept, our lives are different now. The child kept crying. Her face was so dirty that her tears washed clean streaks down her cheeks. Esperanza suddenly felt ashamed and the color rose in her face, but she still pushed the valise farther under the seat with her feet and turned her body away from Mamma. Esperanza tried to not look back at the little girl, but she couldn't help it. She wished she could tell the little girl's mother that she had always given her old toys to the orphanage and that this doll was special. Besides, the child would have soiled it with her hands. Mamma reached into her bag and pulled out a ball of blanket yarn. Esperanza, hold your hands out for me. She raised her eyebrows and nodded toward the girl. Esperanza knew exactly what Mamma intended to do. They had done it many times before. Mamma wrapped the yarn around Esperanza's outstretched hands about 50 times until they were almost covered. Then she slipped a string of yarn through the middle of the loops and tied a tight knot before Esperanza removed her hands. A few inches below the knot, Mamma tied another snug knot around all the yarn, forming a head. Then she cut the bottom loops, separated the strands into sections, and braided each section into what looked like arms and legs. She held the yarn doll up, offering it to the little girl. She ran to Mamma, smiling, took the doll, and ran back to her own mother's side. The mother whispered into the girl's ear. Shyly, she said, Gracias. Thank you. De nada. You're welcome, said Mamma. The woman and the children got off the train at the next stop. Esperanza watched the little girl stop in front of their window, wave to Mamma, and smile again. Before she walked away, she made the yarn doll wave goodbye, too. Esperanza was glad the girl got off the train and took the silly yarn doll with her. Otherwise, she would have been reminded of her own selfishness and Mamma's disapproval for miles to come. Okay, so it appears that Esperanza has a lot to learn, changing from being the rich, powerful girl she's used to being to now being a peasant along with everybody else who was on her train car. It's a big change. Um, it almost kind of even makes you a little bit feel sorry for Esperanza, even though she's kind of being a brat about it right now. Okay, so your challenge for today is I want you to look up pictures of yarn dolls on the internet, and then I want you to describe what they look like. Okay, so look up pictures of them, and then give a 3 or 4 sentence description of what a yarn doll looks like, and then think in your mind the difference between that yarn doll and that beautiful porcelain doll that Esperanza had, and think about how happy that little girl was with just that yarn doll that she was given. Okay, I'll see you guys tomorrow.